When it comes down to it, painting a bust and painting a 32mm miniature isn't incredibly different. All of the differences between painting the two stem from the size difference, which is likely obvious. A 32mm miniature is basically a 6-foot character shrunk down 60 times, whereas a bust is something closer to 10 times shrunk down. How that size difference impacts your painting process is what we're going to go over today in this video. But first, who am I and why can you trust me? My name is Scott. I've been painting minis for 2 decades, and more importantly, busts for a couple of years. I have a couple under my belt at this point in my career and feel confident painting them. We painted the Doctor from Mindware Games, a small boutique miniature brand that has some excellent busts, one of which I've already painted, the Chef. While painting the bust, we'll be discussing how I'm adjusting my painting process because of the medium. Most busts cannot stand on their own and need to be mounted on some kind of plinth. In my case, I'm using an old plinth from a previous model. Mark the center of your square plinth by drawing 2 lines that connect the opposite corners. Where the lines meet in the middle is the center. For a cylindrical plinth, grab some calipers or something similar set to the approximate radius of your cylinder, with half of the lower jaw on the outside of the plinth and the other half somewhere near the middle. Scribe a mark. Do this at several intervals around the plinth's perimeter. With all those marks, you should have an approximate center to drill. Ideally, you drill this hole with a drill press, but most hobbyists, myself included, don't have that luxury, so I'm going to use a hand drill today and drill as straight as possible, knowing that I'll have to deal with some inaccuracy later. You also want to use a drill bit size that is close in size to your chosen material for mounting the bust, which we'll get into now. When it comes to what to use for mounting your bust, a couple of options are available. Historically, I've used brass, both hollow and solid. It's soft enough to cut with a hobby saw and more than strong enough to hold a bust upright. The issue is it's quite hard to adjust a brass rod when it's crooked and can lead to some unfortunate situations. I personally recommend using styrene. In this video, I used a hollow piece of styrene, but a solid option would do great as well. Resin busts are very lightweight, and styrene is more than capable of holding it upright while also being much easier to cut and bend than brass. If there's some slop with the styrene, you can add some milliput or anything similar to fill the gap. Also add some super glue to adhere everything. While doing this, try to check that the rod is as close to perpendicular to the surface of the plinth as possible. It's okay if it isn't perfect at this stage. With everything nice and pure, grab a hairdryer and heat the styrene while also gently bending it. Check it frequently during this process to see how your adjustments are going until you got it pretty close or bang on to 90 degrees. Next, hold your bust next to your plinth to gauge where you should cut the styrene. Remember that a portion of the styrene will go inside the bust, so cut extra to account for that. Now drill a hole in your bust by first creating a small pilot hole with a smaller drill bit or an X-Acto knife like I'm doing here, and then drill. Check the fit before gluing and then add super glue and lock it down. If this all sounds too complicated, some companies sell plinths with a rod already installed nice and straight. I'll link that option in a couple other plinth stores below for you to check out. With our bust installed on our plinth, it's now time to start painting. To show that you don't need any fancy painting tools to paint a bust, I'll simply use my AIRBRUSH to apply a layer of black primer, just like you can do with an aerosol can. There's no undercoating or anything special beyond that for this entire model. Also, because I know I'm going to get crap for it, I'm covering up this beautiful wood because I personally believe that plinths should almost always be a solid black color. I'm not trying to attract your attention to my zebra-striped clown wood. I want you to look at the mini. With that done, we can begin on the most important part of the bust, and really any miniature, the face. When it comes to bust painting, people get really concerned with skin tones, and if that's the case, just use a pre-mixed solution like I am here. I'm using a paint from Chimera, but you can use whatever you like. I'll start by taking this paint and mixing in some black and red. I do this for a number of reasons. I add in black to darken it down and desaturate it because shadows are desaturated, and this is my shadow color. I'll also do this to make it cover over black more easily. The darker it is, the better the coverage will be slightly. The red is added in to make the mix more lively, as humans have blood running under their skin and skin is translucent. I'll then base coat the model with this mix and then move into highlighting. When it comes to the highlights, I'll mix in more of my midtone into that darker base coat and then use pure midtone in 2 different layers. As for where to place these highlights, a lot of knowledge you know from mini painting is applicable, except for a few extras. The orbicular oris, for the part of skin right above the top lip, is significantly larger on busts than minis, so you can actually blend across it instead of it being one color. You're going to want to highlight the piece of skin on either side of the bottom lip, right below the crease where the top lip and bottom lip meet. Lastly, you may want to enunciate parts of the nose, like the nostrils, the tip of the nose, and the bridge of the nose by having obvious lines of separation between them. We'll go over how to do that in a subtle way in a bit. The rest of the areas to highlight are all fairly standard, but let's go over it top to bottom. The center of the forehead, the orbicularis oculi above both eyes, the upper and lower eyelids, the tops of the cheeks, making sure to shove paint all the way up near the tear ducts, the bridge of the nose, the philtrum or Cupid's bow, and the chin. Sorry for using scientific terms, but I'm unfamiliar with the colloquial terms for the bit of man flesh above your eye. Man flesh. The rest of the areas to consider are unique to the bust that you're painting. Just like real human faces, busts are all different and will have unique volumes to consider. For instance, this model has some crease lines on her forehead above her eyes that I had to work with, along with a very slight volume in the middle of the underside of her cheek. My advice for dealing with very slight volumes like this is to not accent them a lot. If they're too contrasted, it can look a little strange. It can be really tempting while highlighting to not cover up the darkest shadows on every single volume or to highlight every single volume to your max highlight. The key is to think locally, and let me explain what I mean by that. Take this bust that I painted previously. Let's start by finding the maximum highlight and shadow on this character's face. You notice that across the face where there is shadow and highlight, they often don't reach the max. For example, looking at his nose is a shadow right in the middle, but it isn't that dark. Relative to the highlights in the local area, the nose, it's dark enough to distinguish the shadow there, but globally across the entire face, there is much more contrast. That meant that while I was painting this face, I had to paint over what I knew would eventually be shadow with layers of highlight, because otherwise it would be too obnoxiously dark and stand out like a sore thumb right in the center of his face. You have to know when to stop highlighting various parts of the face, and a good rule of thumb is that the lower the detail is on the face, the darker it'll be. Alright, where were we? I have some pretty rough highlights on the face, and now I'll show you a nice way to blend them in. If you're layering highlights up, take the second to last color you used and dilute it with water. Then glaze that color on the edges of your most recent highlight to blur the harsher edge into something softer. You can do this for every layer of color where it's not as smooth as you would like. If you need some glazing help, check out my video on the topic. At a certain point when painting the face, I'll start mixing in brighter colors like an off-white yellow. I use an off-white yellow to maintain some saturation in the skin, because when you mix in a brighter color like white for instance, you begin to desaturate the colors. Do that enough times with skin tone and suddenly your character is incredibly pale and dead looking. I continue on doing the same thing, increasing my contrast by adding rough layers of highlight and then softening those layers by glazing the previous mix over the rough transition line. Before moving on to the eyes, let's hear a brief word from our sponsor. Mindwork Games is a small, independent creator of display miniatures. They create concepts from their own illustrations as well as from the art of other creators. Recently, they dove into the world of busts with the miniature you're seeing me paint in this video, the Doctor. This concept is from a new collection called Diner at the End of the Galaxy, which will feature sci-fi designs that are full of pop culture, movie, and comic book references. It doesn't take itself too seriously. What I enjoy about these busts is they have details on them that are up to your interpretation. You're not locked in by a box art, an over-designed part, or lore. Does that pill-shaped object she's holding contain a floating brain, a fluid to deliver the death sentence, or maybe some blood for a transfusion? You get to pick what's going on here. If you're a fan of the aesthetic, Mindwork Games is introducing a new model to this series, the Pilot. A character that gives me some serious Rocketeer vibes, sans Billy Campbell's little baby pink nose. It's so cute! Other models that Mindwork Games is excited to show the Mini family is their Lord of the Rings inspired diorama of Éowyn battling the Witch King of Angmar, based on the artistic interpretation of Frank Frazetta. Similar to that impressive diorama, they have another diorama piece available for purchase based on The Wizard of Oz. This model is based on the artwork of Gabriel Del Otto and is limited edition. In fact, all of Mindwork Games models are limited edition, so once they're sold out, they're gone forever. Mindwork Games isn't only a boutique of excellent display miniatures, they also sell awesome art books and are officially licensed to sell Frank Frazetta art prints. Now until the end of June, they're offering viewers of the Miniac channel 15% off with the coupon code Miniac15 in case you need any more incentive to pick up these creamy sculpts. They also have options for sculpting, painting, and casting as a service. If you have any awesome ideas for miniatures that you want to create, Mindwork Games can help with that. You can find links to all their stuff in the description below. All right, back to the face. With the skin done, I'll start to work on the eyes. To emulate the red you often see around the perimeter of eyes, I'll start by base coating the eyes with a darker red color. Then I'll mix up an eye white color with some white, black, and purple. Purple is a strange inclusion, but I'll tell you why I'm including that in a little bit. With this mixture, I'll base coat the eye, making sure to leave a thin red line around the perimeter of the eye. Note that if you mess up and obscure this thin red line somewhere, you can just repaint it. Throughout the entire process, I am constantly going back and forth, fixing mistakes, which is very normal. I then paint a dark ochre iris, which is a sort of yellow. I'm not painting a circle, but instead a semicircle. This gives the impression that the rest of the iris is below the eyelid and gives our character a more relaxed, normal look instead of a crazed look. With that done, I outline the iris with a brighter, more saturated yellow. Now the darker center of the iris looks like a pupil without being black. I find that when I use black for the pupil, it's a little too intense. I also picked a slightly purple eye white color to contrast nicely with my yellow iris. Lighter eye colors have a hard time sticking out, so I thought I'd assist the yellow by giving it a backdrop of its contrasting partner, purple. The last step for me is to add a bright white specular highlight to one side of the eye. Specular highlight! I turned into an East Coaster when I said that word. The last step for me is to add a bright white specular highlight to one side of the eye. Generally, you add this to whatever side of the eye your light is coming from. Pay no mind to the fact that I am doing it absolutely wrong here. I'll fix it later. All right, eyes done. Let's do some face enhancements. With larger face, we can have some more fun, so let's give it a try first with some lip color. With a mixture of red and brown, I glaze the lips to create a more natural lip look. Some characters have more of a predominant upper lip, so watch out for that. This one, however, doesn't really. I'll next glaze some pure red into the sides of the face, the upper cheek, and also the end of the nose. The cheek is where the skin of the face is most thin, so it's easiest to see the blood flowing beneath, resulting in a rosier skin tone. The red also thins the face as you're adding some slight darkness to the edges, making it appear less wide. Lastly, the red on the end of the nose is just cute. No science involved in cuteness. Because we're painting a female character, I decided to add some makeup. I glazed on some green eyeshadow over multiple passes. Additionally, I added a darker eyeshadow color on the eyelids with multiple passes of a thin black paint. Make sure to paint both the top and bottom eyelid. Not shown here is me coming in with a grayish skin tone color to re-add highlights to the upper and lower eyelids, as this process darkened them a bit too much. Lastly, I'll paint a beauty mole on the top of her left cheek because she kind of reminds me of Marilyn Monroe, but more importantly, we can make the dot small enough to work in the scale that we're painting in. That'll do it for the face. If you want even more painting advice, check out this video where I explore the world of makeup. So much of what I'm talking about in this video was inspired from that research.
Okay, then do it.
You do it.
No, you.
Oh God. I mean, this is a train wreck. Hopefully you can see how painting a face on a bust is a lot of the same process as a normal miniature, but a little more intense because we have more room to work. I'm gonna fast forward through the next couple of parts as the scale of the model isn't impacting the process, and I wanna keep this video a little shorter, but if you want a video where I casually talk about the entire painting process of this model and other models in the past, check out the $10 tier of my Patreon. All right, let's begin working on her torso, which is very large and will be incredibly challenging to blend across. After I base coat, I start to apply layers of highlights. You can obviously see the dividing line between the layers, and that is intentional. With the layering done, I'll start to stipple on top of the divide between color A and B with either color A or B. If you want A to be more predominant, use that. Heck, you could use a mixture of color A and B, and that would work too. You really gotta do some work to cover up that line with a ton of tiny dots. Go back and forth with the color A and B to really hide the layer. Use different dilutions of paint to help with randomness as well. If you can't tell, we're killing two birds with one stone here. We're blending in a more passive way by first establishing where we want our colors to be and then hiding the layers with stippling, but also we're adding texture. Texture is a huge area of opportunity on larger scales because we can render something like denim or felt because everything is proportionately larger compared to the smallest brush strokes that we can make. If the surface is large enough, you can skip the layering process and just sponge on highlights or shadow color. I've done that a number of times on busts to paint armor or greasy cloth or this weird pill-shaped thing our doctor is holding to look really rough and beat up. Because a bust is so large, we can get away with that. Once all those transitions are nice and hidden, you can further enunciate this effect by adding brighter dots to increase the contrast where there wasn't a layer line to hide, or you can glaze in a darker shadow color to soften some of the texture and to increase the contrast through darkening the shadows. It's worth mentioning that this method of blending on larger surfaces can also be hot swapped with other techniques. You could establish layers of colors and hide the transitions with glazing if you wanted a smoother effect, sort of like we did with the face earlier. I'll link a video below that shows this technique. Lastly, with all this surface area, we can absolutely do some freehand. This character is called the Doctor, and at the moment she isn't really looking like it. I decided to reinterpret what colors a doctor might use in whatever world she is from, but to help a viewer from this world understand what I'm trying to convey, let's add some hospital iconography. I'll begin by establishing the shape of my freehand with white paint, as I plan to paint it yellow eventually, and yellow has some pretty terrible coverage properties. I'll slowly adjust the size of the icon until I like it. I'm kind of sneaking up on the end design. I'll then fill it in with yellow. Easy peasy. I filled the center with a slightly brighter heart and then glazed the edges with an orange to add in some shading and highlighting to my freehand. Again, because I can make the freehand so large, I can do fun things like this. Lastly, I'll take some thinned down black paint and paint a heart monitor signal through the heart and also around the perimeter of the heart to make it stand out nicely from the green. Smack on some weathering and these freehands are looking great. Those are all the areas that my paint job was impacted by the scale of the bust and other considerations that I have while painting busts. But I likely missed some of your questions, so let's answer some of those that I got from my YouTube community. If you want to make sure you don't miss opportunities like this to ask questions, hit the bell icon below and you'll get notified when I make a post to my YouTube community. Okay, the first question is why paint a bust? There's no game, there's no purpose, right? First off, if you don't want to paint a bust, don't. I'm not gonna twist your arm. I paint busts because I have fun doing it. I'm not painting with a means to an end. I'm painting because I enjoy the process of painting, and busts provide a fun, unique challenge compared to what I normally paint. Question number 2, where do you buy busts? I'll link a couple shops below that have some cool busts to check out. Question number 3, do you actively avoid any techniques because you're painting a larger scale model? I wouldn't necessarily avoid anything in particular, but I might adjust how I use a technique. If I have a huge surface to blend across, I might not try to wet blend across the entire thing at once. I might break it up into smaller logical pieces so that it's easier to do. My hypothetical fear here is that the paint's gonna dry before I finish the blend. Maybe I might use retarder to make the paint last longer. Question number 4, what do you do with parts of the model that just end abruptly? Honestly, I just paint them black. The process of painting a bust is intense enough for me already that I don't feel the need to do extra credit and paint those parts especially. Also, similar to a black base rim on a model, I find that those black parts frame the paint job pretty nicely. If that answer doesn't satisfy, maybe you could paint those parts the mid-tone of the object they're cutting off, or do a cross-section of whatever they're splitting. For instance, if it's cutting off an arm, you could show some bones, some flesh, some blood, etc. Question number 5, can you do anything fun with the plinth the model sits on? Absolutely. Here are some great examples, some of which came from my Discord. Every quarter we have a challenge on my Discord, and one quarter we did busts as a subject with an extra credit assignment of making a thematically fitting plinth. If you want to join my Discord, check out the $2 tier of my Patreon. These are often very different in how they look and are built, and some busts come with a fun setting for the model prescribed. Question number 6, is painting a bust easier or harder than a 32mm model? Maybe a bit of both? Sure, the eyes are larger and easier to paint, but because the eyes are larger, we're able to do more complicated eyes, which then in turn makes it kind of the same difficulty level. Additionally, because there are such large surfaces to blend on, it can be really challenging compared to a much smaller surface. That's gonna do it for this video, guys. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel and want to support it, the best way to do that right now is to check out my pre-order store. If you missed the opportunity to back my Kickstarter campaign, you now can with the pre-order store, links down in the description. You can pick up any of the items that were available during the campaign for a limited time before fulfillment begins. Grab a 75mm Wood Elf miniature, their 32mm counterparts, masterclass courses that teach you how to paint the minis, a bespoke metal brush box designed to hold your brushes and other hobby tools, sexy wooden plinths, and some Miniac merch. However, if you prefer to support the channel in a different way, there is an article down in the description that highlights all the ways that you can do that, both free and not free. Subscribe or die! But most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!